Eternals is the latest MCU movie to hit theaters once again. They are foregoing the Disney Plus Premier Access thing, similar to what they did with Shang-Chi. That movie did incredibly well at the box office, all things considered. So of course they're going to stick to the theatrical model for at least now, unless things get worse. Alright. And this movie is about a group of people called the Eternals. They're made by this Prime Celestial. Then they were selected to go to Earth to fight off these creatures called the Deviants. And it seems like they're very successful at it. They destroyed all the Deviants. There hasn't been a Deviant sighting in like a millennia, but they're still stuck on Earth, awaiting kind of further orders to leave if possible. But then all of a sudden, in the present day of 2021, Deviants return. So the Eternals have to regroup and reconnect after a millennia of kind of being apart and learn to be a team again to stop the Deviants. Like every MCU movie at this point, I was really excited to see this movie. I'm incredibly invested in the series as a whole, seeing where it can go now that Endgame is past, you know, what is meant by many considered like a big enough movie to be considered a finale, and they're still going. What else do they have up their sleeve? So I'm incredibly excited to see the new things that they are bringing to the table, like Shang-Chi, which was incredibly successful, not just from a box office perspective or critical perspective, but like for me, I was really invested in that movie. I got to new characters and got to see a whole new side of the MCU we had not seen prior, and I'm really excited to see where that could continue to grow and even connect to the larger MCU stuff. And this movie was kind of setting itself up as, you know, this movie, no matter what you feel about the other MCU movies or any other comic book movie, this is going to be the one to watch because it's made by Academy Award-winning director Chloe Zhao, who just also delivered the Best Picture winner of last year, Nomadland, which is a great movie. It's not my personal pick to win Best Picture, obviously, but it's a fantastic movie. I have no problem with it winning. Chloe Zhao directed the hell out of that. It's really good. So her coming into an MCU movie is obviously very exciting. There's a lot of talk early on about like how she was really pushing to use practical locations. There were certain like cinematography things, filming things that she learned on Nomadland that she applied to this movie. So a lot of people were going in expecting like the second coming of Christ for like comic book movies, for like revitalizing the comic book movie genre. And with her writing the screenplay too, it seemed like this was definitely going to be a surefire hit. Sure, she's writing it with 3 other people listed as, you know, screenplay writers. One of them wrote Peter Rabbit 2, The Runaway recently, and the other guys haven't really written anything that I think anyone else would really know. It's mostly been like TV stuff. But hey, Chloe Zhao is writing, so that's exciting. Combine that with the fact that you have now a fantastic cast of people working with this material, being introduced in the MCU, this just seemed like it was just going to be a surefire hit. And I saw this movie a couple days ago, and I've been wary of kind of talking about it, only because before the movie came out, a narrative, a couple different narratives actually already started to form online because it came out and early on the reception was pretty positive, but a little more lukewarm than normal. It was sitting at like a 60% for a while, the lowest rated MCU movie on Rotten Tomatoes, which is not Rotten Tomatoes giving specific grades to things. It's just an amalgamation of a bunch of different critics submitting thoughts. But people still act like it's Rotten Tomatoes giving a certified grade just on their own. It's like, no, it's literally just an algorithm. It's nothing personal against you, obviously. But then leading up to the movie, once we got into the actual week of release, more critics started to see early screenings, critics away from the actual like Disney held premiere stuff. And that grade started to dip. It was in the 50s. I think it even touched into like 49 briefly. I think it's back up to 50. I don't know where it is right now, but it's that low. So there's a lot of people that had seen it early that loved it already trying to say, well, this is clearly just a bunch of white critics that are upset that they are no longer represented by the MCU in a movie. You know, they see all these diverse characters, diverse actors, and they're upset that they don't have complete control of the narrative. Even though arguably a white male is leading the majority of this film once again. So yes, there's more diverse characters, but the complaint that white critics are upset that there's no white character leading the film is a little dumb. So that started to form. The narrative of if you don't like this movie, if you don't support this movie, potentially you are a sexist, you're a racist, homophobic even, you know, because of how much diversity is in this, so much representation. A lot of people love that, and that's obviously fantastic. But there's already this narrative of if you don't like the movie, it can't be for any other reason other than these things. But on the opposite end, you have people who, don't like the movie, see all these people, loving it, and they're like, well, obviously you're just dumb Marvel fans who are just biased because you're invested in the series, so of course you're gonna love no matter what Marvel gives you. So when I saw this movie a couple days ago, I saw it Thursday night, and I could have reviewed it Friday morning. I had nothing going on, I had a day off. But instead, I didn't. I took a couple days to finally do it, and it's mostly just because I knew it's no matter what I say about this movie, there's going to be that kind of reaction. Either they're mad that I don't like the movie, or they're mad that I do like the movie. You can't win, and that's kind of frustrating. I think it's really frustrating when people start to form a discourse before a movie is even released, before they even have a chance to see it, and then they start to talk about it and maybe don't even see it at all. Or they come at other people for having different opinions. It's not even you saying something like, I like a movie like Loquisha or The Haunting of Sharon Tate, movies that are like actually kind of harmful and hurtful and despicable. You're just having an opinion on a comic book product in a long series of other comic book products that end in ways that get you excited for the next comic book product, which will ultimately get you excited for the biggest comic book product. So I just find it kind of ridiculous that you have these people that are dumb and will complain about like the representation. How dare you, this is Marvel being woke, but then you have other people who love the representation, but then they're like, well, I want to stick it to the people that don't like this movie because I believe that they are all this, generalizing things. They're trying to make it a black and white thing, and it's not that. So all that being said, how do I feel about the movie? Well, it's a little wonkus, if I'm gonna be honest. For all the talk of making Disney Plus Marvel series, it's weird that this was not the first one, because it seems like they're really careful about what they do make into a series and what they are keeping as a movie. With the like movies, like the big cinematic experience really applies to this character or whatever. We have a short enough story that works as a movie. And then you have the shows where they're like, hey, WandaVision, we can like experiment, do different episodes in different styles and tell an overarching story that's, important. Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It's not really as like cinematic as like other movies like a Shang-Chi or anything like that. It's a little bit more grounded. So we can probably make that like a Disney Plus series. Same with Loki, you're not even following the Loki you've seen in the movies. It's a deviant Loki. So, why not? So I think they've been really careful about how they've been making these Disney Plus shows. They're about to even introduce new characters into the series through shows. So it's not a thing of like, well, these characters have been established before, so that's why they're getting shows. Like, no, they're about to venture into Miss Marvel, Moon Knight, She-Hulk even. So the Eternals probably could have worked better as a show, but I'm sure they all thought, well, spectacle, and that was like the top priority then at that point, was making it into a movie. Not that it's even a poorly made movie at all. Chloe Zhao, I think, makes a pretty strong movie. The action sequences obviously are a lot of fun to watch. The visual effects are very strong here too. It's got a great score by Ramin Djawadi. There's a lot of like Game of Thrones in this. Like the score sounds a lot like something you'd hear on Game of Thrones, and then you combine the fact that Richard Madden and Kit Harington are in this movie. So that's pretty funny. And most of the cast also does a great job in their respective roles. And Chloe Zhao, something that she does with this movie is that she tries to make the best of it while she's there. I'll explain why. Because more than a lot of other MCU movies, there's a lot of themes going on. There's a lot of things that they're trying to work in. It's an MCU movie. I'm not trying to say it's so different to the point where it doesn't even feel like an MCU movie, because it is. It is an MCU movie. It still has the comedy, the action beats, and all that. But it's different in the sense that they're trying to talk about a lot more than a lot of MCU movies have before. Even movies that have touched on themes before, like this is like a lot going on here. Like you have like these characters kind of, you hint at the idea that they're, shaping these kind of myths and legends that started on early on in society. You have themes of love, themes of family, purpose in life, even self-identity. There's so much in here to kind of talk about that I think a lot of people have latched onto, because it is like so much more so than the other MCU movies. So that's obviously a really great sign. My issue is that I don't think it's implemented well, and the structure of this movie is so weak that it kind of falls apart for me, and I couldn't really connect emotionally to any of the themes, but also any of the characters. This is why I thought this would make a better show, because then you'd have a couple episodes, 6, 8, whatever, how many they want to do, and you'd have the time to really structure things out, and over the course of a series, you would really feel everything, because everything has a chance to shine. Whereas in a movie, even though it's 2.5 hours, which is pretty long for a movie introducing these new characters, it still feels forced and rushed in some areas. Like, there's one part of the movie where it made me really think about that, where they go to meet Druig again. It's been a millennia since they've seen Druig, played by Barry Keoghan. And that whole section of the movie where they go to meet Druig and then they try to convince him to come back, there's some, character tension, it's a little iffy, there's some action beats and eventually a resolution. That felt like that could be just like one episode of a series. It's like the one part of the movie where when they try to get the band back together, they actually are kind of confronted with some past character tension that's kind of potentially evolving these characters as well. They're having these interesting conversations. At least it's something, as there's so many parts of this movie where there's just not any tension when they go to meet them. They're just like, oh, hey, how's it going? They might as well have like broken up the Eternals team like yesterday or whatever, because they just act like they've been around for like since 500 BC, maybe even earlier. But they don't make you really feel like they have been there that long. When we reintroduce Cersei, who was like the lead character of this movie, Kevin Feige has said, like, if anyone's the lead, it's Cersei, played by Gemma Chan. When we reintroduce her into this movie after they show the quick scene in the beginning showing them in the past arriving to Earth, it's just a very quick, like, hey, I'm a teacher and I'm dating Kit Harington. Uh-oh, there's a deviant over there, And it's like, for this character being the lead, I feel nothing for her right now. I don't know anything about her other than she used to date Richard Madden. But even that happens really quickly and you're not even really sure why these two connect at all, like why these two actually like get along or potentially form a romance, because they've also been together for a very long time and it seems like they've only broken up recently. But how recent is that in comparison to this long stretch of time? Like, what's happening? There's like some confusing dialogue in that, like in that reintroduction of Cersei bit where, like, she's talking to Kit Harington at one point and they say something in a certain way, but then, as the movie keeps moving, they say other things where I'm like, wait, I'm confused, the dialogue kind of left me confused as far as like how they were trying to reestablish this character and also what's going on in her life at the moment. Kit Harington's inclusion in this, he's fun, he's a fun actor, he's got some funny little, I'm a normal man jokes, but he's kind of, I found the inclusion really weird because he doesn't have a lot to do like at all. He's only in kind of like the beginning. They sprinkle him in at one part of the movie and then he's gone forever, and then he's there at the end for a weird setup that I didn't think was built on at all. It felt like a Sony movie or BVS, how they just like shoehorn in something that doesn't really have anything to do with the rest of the narrative. They didn't really hint at it properly either. It's just, well, this is from the comics, so yeah, there you go. We've established it. There you go. There's actually quite a few characters where they, try to explore the love theme, where, they have a romance going. And it's like, I don't feel anything. I really don't, because when they show these characters in the past, they don't do a good enough job of really showing them, form these bonds, see them actually interact with culture, see them actually influence the stories that they then tell, It's all just, it feels very, I hate to say it, but almost very like last minute as far as like, oh, that could have been cool. Well, maybe we can write it in at the last second, Let's shoot this really quick, guys. And it just didn't really feel like that was actually much part of the story, but it is sort of, it just didn't feel like a lived-in world. These characters don't feel lived in at all. They just feel like they all showed up yesterday. Not to knock Chloe Zhao or anything, because most of this movie is made real well, but there's certain moments where the actors, it feels like they were directed stilted. Like they like were just trying to be like completely composed and like are you okay? That kind of way of talking and acting really serious, And it's like, that's kind of like the exact opposite of what kind of emotion I think most audiences would expect from you at this time. I'm feeling alienated from these characters I'm supposed to grow a fondness for, And even some moments of like the staging, where like at one point it seems like Richard Madden and Kumail Nanjiani had scheduling conflicts, so they couldn't show up for like one scene, but except for like the very end where they can run in and be like, guys, are you okay? It's like, I'm sure there must have been some narrative reason for that, but literally everyone else on the team was there except for those two, and they never showed where they were specifically. So I was like, is it just they couldn't show up to set on time and they were like, fuck it, let's film the scene and write in a reason why? Or a moment where Cersei is sitting down in a place and you can see a hallway and behind her, and then they cut to a wider shot and there's just a person standing in that hallway now where you very obviously could not see them before. There's one moment where a character gets knocked away somewhere impossible. But then they just show up like a minute later, like, oh, I'm actually completely okay. Like, I'm sure it doesn't sound like a big deal when I say it, but when you see the movie and you see what I'm talking about, because it's literally not hard to miss, it's in the third act, I was like, you're trying to play this up as a joke, and I don't really find it funny because I'm thinking of what the fuck just happened, you know? Like, I have no idea what's happening here. And once again, the infamous weak MCU villain strikes again with Crow. I'm not gonna spoil who the actor is because I didn't know personally, and then I saw this name pop up in the credits. I was like, holy shit, you know? But this character, he just kind of shows up randomly and has a couple lines throughout the movie. But he shows up like in the middle and he only pops up occasionally throughout the rest. Actually, you know what? I think it's fewer than that. I think he just shows up in the middle and then he shows up to be in the third act. And it's just a really weak villain. Once again, it's something that could be interesting if you had more time with the character, had more time to juggle all these themes you're trying to approach with. But instead it just comes across as just I'm a big hulking guy. We need this. We need the lizard space dude to be this villain now. And it's like, it doesn't really work for me, but it could have if you made it longer in a limited series perhaps. It's weird because yeah, it's a 2.5-hour movie, but things feel truncated. Things don't feel well implemented or really properly explored even. There's one character named Makari who's like the speedster, who's also deaf in real life and deaf in this movie. And the way they reintroduce her in this We're Getting the Band Back Together movie is just they show up at their secret hideout and she's just there. And when they show up, she doesn't even act surprised that they're there. She's just like, what's up? I've been reading. Now I'm gonna flirt with Druig because apparently this was a thing that you definitely cared about, audience, that we definitely properly introduced and explored. And I've never really experienced this before, but this is a movie where it ends really well. If I'm gonna be honest with you, the ending of this movie is kind of chilling and dark and weird in a way that the MCU movies kind of haven't before. Like, it is a weirder ending than, like, say, Infinity War. Infinity War is kind of more sad and like, oh, but what's gonna happen next? This is kind of like, what the fuck? You know, it's kind of crazy what they do to end this movie on. But then they have the post-credit scenes, and it's like, this is purely just commercial at this point. I think the post-credit scenes in the past, I have never had a problem with them before. You know, I think they've all had a way of like, hey, each movie feels complete, and this is just, hey, this is to tie up maybe one loose end and to potentially hint at something else. I think they've done a good job of hinting at things to come. But this was one where they were just being really overt and not subtle about like, hey, we're gonna introduce this character now, and that they were gonna completely spoil any fleshed out introduction for them in like a sequel or anything like that. They're just here now and they're gonna help out for the next one. Really, and I found that really awkward. And especially the second post-credit scene where, like I said earlier, there's a character who is from the comics. They don't hint at anything leading up to this, but then they're like, oh, throw this in, fuck it. And then that's it. You know, I found these post-credit scenes really weak, which is a weird thing to say because the Marvel movies usually do them the best and they're the most exciting because you're the most involved in this series more so than like Venom or anything like that. But I found this really weak. Overall, I can't really say this is the worst MCU movie because The Incredible Hulk, that's the worst one. Like, no contest. I watched that again like recently. It's still the worst MCU movie I've seen. But I can't really fault anyone if they think this is the worst one, simply because it does feel like it has a bit of an identity crisis because it's trying to juggle all these mature themes. It's trying to be something different. But at the same time, it's a typical MCU structure with its comedic beats and its action beats as well. Like, well, we could have an action scene here. So, okay, let's throw one in. Why not? I mean, comedy is pretty good. That's the thing, is that the comedy in here is pretty good. Kumail Nanjiani delivers most of it, and he's really funny in this. And his character even turns out to be a little bit more complex than we imagined at the start of the movie, so I was cool with that. Angelina Jolie is fun in this movie. She's like the one actress who I would say out of everybody, she completely understood how to act in every scene. Like I don't mean to knock anyone at all because everyone does a solid job, but she was the one where every time she was on screen, I was like, there's life in this. You know, this is the most interesting character that they aren't giving a lot of screen time to. And even like Brian Tyree Henry, he's got some funny like dry humor, and he's also got like a sweet family life going on, and that's really sweet. I would say like my issue with Brian Tyree Henry, I guess, is like going back to not everything feels fully fleshed out, not everything it feels perfectly paced. There's one part where they kind of hint like, hey, careful there, if you keep evolving people's technology, crises can get worse or whatever. And then he's just like, nah, that's not right. And then like Hiroshima happens, and he's there, and he's like, if only I hadn't evolved the technology, and oh my gosh. And it's like, it took till Hiroshima to like have like a freak out moment. Like I'm thinking, like right now, I'm thinking of like several different like horrible events in history that probably happened just due to the evolution of technology, or just because people themselves, you could have stepped in and stopped people, but you couldn't. I want to see more of that. I want to see more of like these people that live forever, seeing all these things happen, and they know they can't do anything about it, and they're just watching people act at their worst, you know? But it's just like, oh, I'm only really upset about Hiroshima. And it's like, I feel like you would have broken like much sooner, especially since someone hinted like, hey, careful there, back in like 500 BC. It's like, you know, it's a little, like I said, it's a little wonky, and it probably only could have benefited from more time that they don't have, allegedly. So I'm just kind of perfectly split on this movie. It had some fun action scenes. I appreciate the different things they tried to do. There's some interesting new characters here for sure. I just wish that I was fully in love with them. I wish I was fully connected to their stories and their plight and the rest of the world that they're now introducing. But right now, it's kind of like, you know, I look forward to another one to see if you can, now that maybe just the stepping stone of introducing them and the origin is out of the way, maybe we could just move forward with new interesting stuff, because they do, like I said, before the post-credit scenes, they end in a way that is very interesting and different. I hope that they can make something great, though, because after watching this, I was just like, you know, I was just kind of over it. I wasn't bored, so the 2.5-hour runtime had nothing to do with, like, you know, me being bored. It was just me kind of being over the story being told, because I wasn't emotionally connected to anything. I didn't think they really had a clear focus on what the movie was about, because it's kind of about a lot of different things. I'm gonna give Eternals a C. It's got a good aesthetic to it. Chloe Zhao does make an interesting looking movie. The cast is all great here, great music. It's got fun action, cool visual effects to look at, and even cool costume designs and set designs even, you know. They all do a great job of doing things that the MCU is usually really great at, but then it also falters in ways that the MCU hasn't really done, you know, as much as they usually do. Like, you'll notice some of these problems show up in like a couple MCU movies, but they're mostly at least decent or like really fun. And this for me was just kind of like, well, it's a little too much this time, and I'm not completely vibing with this. But if you've seen Eternals, leave in the comments below what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.